Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me is a return guest. Wendi Gordon was on last year, I believe, and
Yes.
we had a wonderful discussion. And after it, we talked about, we really didn't get into as much deepness of Bruce's spirituality and his music. And that's something you're passionate about. So I said, okay, let's do it again. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit of that, but most importantly, we're going to talk about last year's tour and what you got to see. So welcome.
Thank you. It's a delight to be with you again.
Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
As you can see from my virtual background, I am a mental and spiritual health guide, which guide is my word for coach, basically. I have a Substack newsletter called Changing Lives. And until very recently, I always wrote weekly articles, but now I have shifted to doing more video and audio posts, which are also available on YouTube and as audio podcasts on Spotify and Apple. So that's been a fun switch for me. The mental and spiritual health stuff comes out of my own lived experience and wanting to help others who are going through hard times, as I did, very hard times. I'm a former pastor who had issues with the church, shall we say. My spirituality was broader and more inclusive than some church people wanted it to be. And so that's how I became a writer and speaker and coach in the mental and spiritual health field. And my husband knows when I'm in a funk to get out a Bruce DVD and put it on, and never fails. It's the fastest way to get me into a better headspace.
I love that story. For many of us, 2025 is a scary year, and the next 4 years are going to be scary for us. And we'll get to that in a minute. But let's start out with, so how many of the shows did you get to see in 23 and 24?
Only three, sadly, but one of them was so wonderful. The final one, the Phoenix show. If I had to have a final show to go to on the tour, I'm glad it was the one in Phoenix. It was by far my best experience.
So I am a little bitter because when he originally was going to go to Phoenix the first time before he got sick, I had made arrangements. I was working for a company that had an office that was at Lake Havasu. And so they were going to let me go spend a week at Lake Havasu and then go attend Bruce show there in Phoenix and then fly home. And I made a deal with my boss. I said, I have airline miles. I will pay for the airfare. If you'll pick up the hotel, I could go visit the office. And then we canceled once the show got canceled. So it looks like it was a fun show.
It was. What made it memorable for me was that it was the only time I actually had a good seat. And that
Okay.
was thanks to Springnut Jill Fasulo. I actually had my usual like nosebleed behind the stage seat because that's all I can afford. And she had upgraded to wonderful seats on the side of the stage, lower level, only a few rows up from the floor, and ended up with one of her group being unable to go. So she texted me and said, "Would you like this ticket?" And I replied, "Oh, I wish I could, but I'm sorry, I just can't afford it." And she said, "No, I'll give it to you free." And I, of course, jumped on that and was ecstatic. Plus, it was just fun to meet Jill and also Donna Landez from Springnuts. And they were, of course, in the two seats next to me. So it was just so much fun. That was my first concert where I was actually with other Springnuts and got to spend time with them. And then after that, Stevie had the after party, and Donna treated me to that. And I wouldn't have even known about the after party, honestly. She hadn't
Sure.
told me. And it was different than the other parties in that Stevie, it was right after the concert. Stevie was understandably already exhausted, and he was there, but like in a back dark corner, roped off, and no one could approach him and get photos or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I managed to get his autograph on my poster nonetheless, because I walked up to his security guard and said, handed him my sign and said, do you think there's any chance Stevie would sign this for me? And so he walked it over to Stevie, and Stevie did. And what was even better is I told the guard the correct spelling of my name with an I at the end instead of a Y. And so Stevie spelled it correctly and wrote, "To Wendi, love Stevie." And so I have it framed on my wall now.
That's awesome. Yeah, I got to do 4 shows. I did Dallas, Houston, Austin was free because a wonderful spring nut reached out and said, "Hey, I've got an extra ticket, Jesse. Do you want to join me?" And she did, and I was so ecstatic. And then I was supposed to go to Tulsa, and we were all going to go to Tulsa, my wife and my son and I, because the summer before that, we had gone up there for my birthday there was a Bruce Springsteen exhibit at the Woody Guthrie Museum. So we had spent the day at it, and all 3 of us loved it. And we're like, okay, we should do this again. But after I got home from Austin, the next day I didn't feel very good. And sure enough, when I woke up Saturday morning and I took a COVID test, I had COVID. And that was the first time I'd had COVID. I got nothing through 20, nothing through 21, nothing through 22. But the concerts, that was the gift that got giving.
I remember actually, I was on your podcast shortly after that, and we were
Yeah,
talking about, because I was also at the Austin show, and I also got to go free courtesy of Bruce Funds
yeah,
because I live in the Houston area and was supposed to go to the
yeah.
Houston show, but I got COVID.
That story now.
My husband and I were going to have the best Valentine's Day ever, and instead we're
Yes.
both sick in bed. I
Yeah.
cried for days. And then it was the morning of the Austin show. Like, I didn't think I was going to get to go because
Yeah.
Donna from Bruce Funds had said, "No, sorry, I don't have any tickets." And at the last minute, she called me the day of the show and was like, "I've got one ticket if you want it." And I was like, "Hell yeah." I got in
Yes.
my
Yes.
car and drove to Austin. And
Yeah, because Houston Austin's not a bad trip at all.
no,
So Linda said, okay, you've got one show coming to you for sure. And so I flew to Columbus to see that show. And that was a lot of fun because I, the guy I do my Doctor Who podcast lives in Columbus. And so I got to see him and his wife, Lori. And so got to meet a bunch of spring nuts. And it was just a lot of fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
similar for me in Phoenix. In addition to the two spring nuts I hung out with, Jill and Donna, and sat beside, I got to meet Howie and Julie and some other spring nuts at the after party. And so that was really nice.
That's nice. Good.
Yeah, that's not going to happen for me, unfortunately, in chance of that.
Me either. Though I just got word as we're recording this, it's February 4th. There is a 50% chance that I might be able to go to the Born to Run symposium in September. We are making a pitch for a panel and a paper to present. And so if they say yes, then I got to convince my lovely bride that I can fly to Jersey for this. But that would be pretty fun. So that's a more details to come later. Yeah. I think what's sad is this country is very divided. And I was very vocal on social media during the campaign of everything that I thought was wrong with once and future President Trump and everything what I thought was right with Vice President Harris. And I stopped letting people post things when I posted something. And I got a little criticism. I said, that's because 2 or 3 people start arguing and it quits.
Personal attacks versus serious state.
And so I only had 2 people I ended up blocking because they were just vicious and would not respond to anything but emotions. Like I would go, okay, here's my facts. What, give me yours. And so that's because you're listening. You need to go to the mainstream media is wrong. And you need to go this, and they give this totally whack ass website and just everything. My frustration, and Wendi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is my wife and I have these problems with I understand supporting someone who has a different political opinion than yours, but so much that this current administration does just seem to be fueled on hate and revenge and not making anyone's life better, but they seem blind to that. So, talk to me a little bit where you want to go with this discussion, Wendi.
So, first of all, I agree with you 100%. And I'm usually a very empathetic person and a good listener and all of that, but I do find it very challenging to have conversations with those on the far right, even within my own family, because this is so much more than your typical, like, former Republican presidents. Okay. I
Yeah.
didn't like their policies. And I would have factual debates with people about, is this really the best way to address this issue? But it's a whole different ballgame now. There's none of that happening. It's just hate and scapegoating. And for the people who voted for him, who aren't like Proud Boy or Nazi sympathizers, et cetera, who are just everyday working people desperate for their lives to be better and struggling to survive, I think they just heard what they wanted to hear. They were desperate for someone to promise um, their expenses would be lower, their wages would go up, life would be better overall, that immigrants were the problem, or LGBTQ people were the problem and were like after their kids and all this kind of crazy stuff. But it enabled people to blame others for their problems and to believe that this magical savior, Trump, was going to come in and fix everything.
You can't talk logic with them. For example, and I will put a political warning before this episode, so if someone is tired of hearing this, they can skip. But I've seen so many people say that God sent angels to make sure the bullet did not hit Trump,
Yes.
Donald Trump. I'm like, okay, so you're saying that God wanted this bullet to kill a volunteer firefighter,
Mhm.
a father, and a husband. So
Yep.
that's and,
Exactly.
and no, that isn't what I'm saying. No, I don't want to be ugly, but that's exactly what you're saying. You're saying that if God spared him, then why didn't God spare the person who was there? Oh, Jesse, you just I'm gonna pray for you.
What makes it especially painful for me is that the majority, or at least in my circles, that many of the people who are Trump's staunchest supporters are also very vocal about their Christian faith and how God sent Trump and Trump is the anointed chosen candidate. And if you're a Christian, you must vote for Trump because he's God's guy. And
Yes.
everything he's doing is the antithesis of everything Jesus taught and modeled. And what about love your enemies? What about welcome the stranger, feed the poor, on and on? All of that is just thrown out the window.
And we had the bishop get just crucified, pardon the pun,
Yes.
of because she spoke that was basically just almost the Sermon on the Mount.
And all she did was just plead for him to be merciful to the people who are terrified right now. And then he ranted about her nasty tone. Well, that was the kindest, gentlest tone I've ever heard from anyone. She in no
Yeah,
way attacked him personally or was bitter or anything.
there wasn't any of that at all. I do find so I have had it is hard for me, and my wife has really become more involved in the church since she's retired, and it brings her great joy. She goes to mass most days a week. She helps put out the candles and do things. Sister's Catholic daughter, she visits elderly people in the hospital. So this has brought her great joy. She goes, I don't want to talk about this with you because I know where you are. And my thought is, I am happy for you, Linda, that serving and helping has made you feel good and it's a positive influence with you. But she acknowledges, I don't agree with the Catholic Church position on abortion. I don't, I certainly am unhappy with all the sex scandals. She goes, I accept the flaws of the Catholic Church, but the need it gives me is there. So talk to me a little about your spiritual journey. Because as you mentioned, that because of, I won't put words in your mouth, the fundamentalists, let's say, of your church, you felt uncomfortable. So tell me a little about that.
Yeah, my husband and I were actually co-pastors of a church, and our denomination, I should say, is very progressive officially. We have openly LGBTQ pastors, bishops, we've pastors that officiated at same-sex weddings for decades now, and we have official statements condemning white supremacy and apologizing for Martin Luther, our founder's horrific statements against Jews. Anyway, so on paper, our denomination is very progressive. And the church that my husband and I currently attend, we actually had pretty much decided, okay, we are totally done with church because there's too many hateful people and arguments, and it's just not worth it. And it's not feeding us spiritually. It's like making us feel worse, right?
Yeah.
But then I stumbled across the website of the church we attend here in the Houston area. And the welcome statement front and center on the church's website, which is also read every Sunday at church, says we welcome believers, questioning believers, those who do not believe, people of all gender identities, sexual orientations, on and on. And I was like, yeah, okay, these people get it. They're actually trying to live the way Jesus told us we're supposed to, basically. But even with that said, I will say that my personal spiritual beliefs, I would no longer say are Christian. I now consider myself a Jesus follower, but not a Christian. I think Jesus himself never wanted this whole hierarchical, patriarchal church thing to become an institution, much less to be in bed with empire the way has been for centuries. And so that's where I'm at. And so I go to church because there are a lot of like-minded people there that I enjoy socializing with. And sometimes during the worship service, there are particular song lyrics or something in the sermon that does touch me spiritually. And other times there are song lyrics I find utterly appalling and just stand there and don't sing along with. Um, so yeah, basically my spirituality at this point is that God loves everyone and everything, no exceptions, no fine print. There is no hell that God sends people to burn for all eternity. Sometimes I wish I did believe that, because then I could be comforted by the thoughts of certain people like Trump spending eternity there and finally being accountable. But with that said, I don't. I absolutely believe that God loves everyone and everything and calls us to do the same. So I actually am currently leading an online spiritual support group called Spiritual Support for Weary Souls. And we're about halfway through it. It's a 6-week group. And I made it very explicit in all the promotional materials that this is not a specifically Christian group and that spiritual experiences can happen to anyone, anywhere. And like 1 week, the topic was spiritual objects. And so I put in parentheses examples of possible things. And I listed tarot cards and others, but tattoos, but you get the idea. I wanted to make it crystal clear that this group is safe for people who are not Christians or who are progressive Christians and don't want to be told they must accept Jesus or only Christians can be saved or any of that stuff.
I think that's wonderful, Wendy, because I was raised in a very conservative Southern Baptist home, and we talked a lot about idol worship and how putting things in front of God. There were wonderful pastors that I had that meant a lot to me. But there would be people in the church I was raised up that would call tarot cards objects of the devil.
Definitely.
I could make the same argument that are tarot cards any different than a rosary
Yeah.
or prayer cards or reading Proverbs or being Psalms, right? If it helps you if it doesn't hurt anyone else and it helps you to feel a more satisfying, loving life, it is very we try to put our supreme being in a box,
Yes.
and that I don't know works sometimes.
I totally agree. Even the names that we use, there's no way that any human can fully comprehend the divine, whether you conceive of the divine as a being or a universal force or whatever it means to you, our interconnectedness, energy field, etc. No human is capable of comprehending that. And the more that we try to, the more we make God in our image instead of seeing ourselves as being made in God's image. There's a saying that whenever you draw a line in the sand of who's in and who's out, Jesus is always on the other side of that line with the marginalized people you're condemning. And there are plenty of Bible stories to back that up where Jesus did exactly that.
Yeah, routinely when I'm seeing something, and social media is a blessing when it allows you to connect people from across the country and share a joy of Bruce Springsteen's music, or a TV show you love, or a sports team you like to cheer, and a sports team you want to boo in a healthy, fun way. But it also truly is incredibly divisive, is you will see people posting things that are just cruel.
Yes.
And then when you pull up scripture about, when did I not feed you? When did I turn you away? And it all of a sudden they become very quiet, Wendi.
Yes.
And I would even have a little more respect if someone said, I'm trying to do my best. When Trump, the campaigner, said, I could end the war in Ukraine immediately, my first day, when I'm elected, before I even take the office, I can just call the phone, it'll be done. If he said, I really thought I could, it's more complicated than that, we're going to keep doing our best, I would go, okay, still don't agree with any of his policies, but at least he can admit that I'm not. But the issue is he doubled downs anytime, and the far right double down. And I'm sure if you're a conservative, you could name tons of far left that are just as irritating to you, that seem to be doing these things. But I don't find a meanness to them that I feel the far right does.
I do actually see some meanness on the left. The key difference for me is
Hmm.
that even among the most vicious verbal attacks that some on the left engage in, I never hear them say, we need to restrict the rights of right wingers from voting. We need to
Yeah,
prevent them from voting, or we need to violently attack them to prevent the certification of the election
right.
results. Things like that, violent acts, or we need to deport all of them, or take your
Yeah.
pick. So to me, that's a key distinguishing marker. But at the same time, and I acknowledge it within myself too, verbal violence is still violence and hate is still hate.
Yes.
And I absolutely agree with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that only love can conquer hate. And it's very hard right now.
It is very hard for me. My sister's husband died unexpectedly at right at Thanksgiving. Just he passed out at work, turned out to have a heart attack. They did open heart surgery. He did not he survived the surgery but did not survive the recovery. 67, and just she's devastated. And so the day of the funeral, I had written to her and I needed to get back to work the next day. And so one of my one of her granddaughters boyfriend, they said, hey, would you mind driving Jesse to back to get his car? And he's looking panicked, And it turns out that he had a Trump sticker on his glove compartment. And he's, Uncle Jesse's just going to rip me a new one. He's going to tell me all these reasons why I'm wrong. And I just voted for him because he said he wouldn't charge over taxes on my overtime. And I hugged him and I said, no, I know where your heart is. I know how good of a man you are and how you treat Kaylee. And I said, it's okay. I'm never going to be. But it was just a sweet moment. And you said it, there are a lot of good people who honestly think that they're buying his bill of goods. They're buying the conservative, the Republicans, the GOP's bill of goods. Yeah.
And in some ways, what bothers me even more are all of the other Christians and people in general who don't buy it, but stay silent and therefore enable it. Others will lose their careers if they speak out, like I did.
Yeah.
And so I get that. But at the same time, at what point do you just say, this is so immoral, I can no longer pretend it's okay or stay quiet about it? Because people are literally dying because of this.
Yeah. It does come back to you wish more people would speak up and to call us on our crap, right? I know I haven't talked about it much on this podcast, though, a couple of times, but I just started a new job on January. And one of the things I told the team, I said, one of my favorite lines is from a TV show, Sports Night. And the guy who's the big boss says, if you're dumb, you surround yourself with smart people. If you're smart, you surround yourself with smart people who disagree with you. I said, guys, I think I'm pretty smart. And so I don't know this job. I don't know this company. And so I'm going to come to you with ideas. And if you disagree with them, you need to tell me why. Now I'm going to push back, and you're going to have facts, and you're going to have data, and we're going to have a discussion. But never be afraid to tell me, this is why I think this is a bad idea, or here's what else I think we should do. And I often tell people, I don't know what the answer to ending gun violence is. I don't have the answer. But I know that there's a lot of smart people in the world. And I feel like if you wanted to, you could get really smart people that are against gun violence, but are really supportive of gun ownership and think it's important for a lot of reasons. And then there's other people who are afraid of guns, but are understand and get together and do something, right? Like the Simpsons had a line, we've tried nothing and we're all out of options. And I sometimes feel that when we look at school shootings or we look at immigration or we do things, they just they don't want to come up with an answer because the idea of perfect gets in the way of good. Thoughts on that, Wendi?
I think there's some truth to that. Also, I actually wrote an in-depth article with all kinds of statistics about gun violence following the Uvalde school shooting in Texas. And so I know that there are a lot of people, including the vast majority of NRA members, for example, actually do favor sensible things like red flag laws, background checks, etc., raising the age to buy an assault rifle to 21 or perhaps not at all, depending large
Yeah,
capacity magazine, etc. And yet their voices are drowned out too, because the politicians answer to the NRA who funds their campaigns.
yeah,
And certainly Ted Cruz is the number one beneficiary in Congress of NRA money and related gun advocacy groups, but yet can agree on some basic common sense safety things. Another example would be gun locks in the home so kids can't accidentally get a gun and shoot themselves or their parent or whoever, their friend. What rational person would be opposed to that? If you own a gun, you obviously don't want your kid getting it out and killing themselves or you or someone else. Everything is so politicized
yeah,
now and so controlled by either the people who profit from selling the guns and so forth, or the lobbyists who have their own reasons. And yeah, it's hard. It's similar with drug addiction, like the opioid crisis. A drug dealer on the street who sells a little bit of it goes to jail for decades, maybe. But the manufacturer of the drug who lied and said this isn't addictive and it's so much better than the alternatives gets away with it, basically.
Yeah, you actually, they can build in that fine or the cost of those lawsuits and just build it into the profit share.
Yes.
So, Wendi, you've talked a little bit about your teaching. You've got a spiritual course, a guide. Let's talk about what can we do in addition to listening to Bruce Springsteen a lot, but what are other things you suggest that we do to keep ourselves sane and moving in the right way?
So I can share what I do and what I suggest to people who come to me like unable to deal with all this stuff. Number one is I, at this point, avoid all news, all social media. Anytime I hear Trump's voice or see his face, I immediately leave the room, put on headphones. Even the publications and the channels that I used to watch, whose commentators I totally agree with and admire, I don't need to hear the latest horrors. I cannot stop them. And it is just too detrimental to my mental health and to my spirits to hear the latest horrible thing that is happening that I can do nothing about. So that's
So,
step one.
so I want to tell you a funny joke.
Okay.
Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller, right, is very good friends with Lawrence O'Donnell from MSNBC, and they made a deal. He said, "You will call me and tell me if something changes and I should support Donald Trump. Will you promise me that?" Yes. Okay. I'm going to stay away from the news then. Right? Like, Lawrence, call me if something changes that now all of a sudden need to. Short of that, I'm staying away. Yes, please continue.
And so then number two is actively seek good news stories. And so there's like a website and a newsletter that I get called Reasons to Be Cheerful. That is nothing true stories from around the world of like heroic rescues, helping alleviate the damage of climate change, reverse it with solar power or other ways, and other stories like that, cute animal videos. Yeah, instead of my diet consisting of all that bad news, even if it's interpreted by people I agree with, seek out good news. And I also focus on, okay, because I am powerless to do anything about the big picture horrible stuff, what small thing can I do locally? Maybe it's just smiling at the grocery store clerk and saying, "How was your day?" Or "You look tired. Has it been really busy in here today?" Things like that. I actually had a wonderful conversation at a grocery store with one of the food sample people
Yeah.
who I just give off this vibe where complete strangers will just bare their souls to me. It's been true my whole life, like in laundromats and airports, anywhere. And I don't ask them probing questions or anything. It just, anyway.
Yeah.
So she and I had this long conversation and it was whispered because we were worried about others in the store
Yeah.
overhearing and it getting ugly. But for example, I went for a walk in the park the other day. That's my other big self-care practice, is being out in nature. And it calms me down when my anxiety is through the roof, which is often these days. So anyway, while I was at the park a couple of days ago, a woman and her daughter, who was maybe about 8, walked past me in the other direction. The mom bent down and picked up a piece of trash off the ground. And her daughter looked up at her and said, "Mom, you're my hero." And then a few steps behind them was Dad. And Dad had one of those tools with the pointed end where you spear trash
Yeah.
with. He was picking up trash too. Okay, here's a reminder: there are still good people in the world and they are still making a positive difference. It may be a small one and it may only affect a tiny part of the world, but it's something. So I'm looking for stories like that, and I'm experiencing them firsthand, and I'm reading about them online or other people are sharing them with me. That's how I hold on to hope these days, basically.
I love
Um,
that.
and the thing about Bruce Springsteen concerts, and his music in general, but particularly the live concerts, The reason they are such spiritual experiences for me and so uplifting and powerful is because for those few hours, here's this crowd of all ages, all ethnic groups, all whatever, that's just unified and purely enjoying life and not thinking about what happened in the past or what we're scared will happen in the future. We are fully in the present, having the time of our lives. And that is one of very few places I can think of, for me anyway, where that happens. And those spaces are so powerful. I was just watching today that Bruce's concert DVD live from New York City, where he channels the revivalist preacher. He does the little bit about,
Yeah.
and he says, unlike my competitors, I will not promise you life everlasting, but I will promise you life right now. And that just sums it up beautifully. That's what he provides.
Yes, he does. And a few years ago, I had been unemployed for almost 9 months, and I built a faith playlist, right? When I had cancer, um, in 2017, I had an F cancer playlist where I had songs of hope and songs of joy and songs that sometimes they're sad songs that give me cry. That so yeah, I think that's a good thing to do. And you said it, you quoted, right? Only love can defeat hate. And so no matter how angry I am and how frustrated I am and how much I want to throw facts and figures at people, that's not going to help, but maybe love will.
Yeah, that has been my biggest learning because before the election, I wrote a lot of articles and they cited extensive facts and linked to the GOP official platform on the GOP site. So it was
Yeah.
clear I wasn't like my leftist propaganda thing. This is on
Yeah.
their site.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I was angry and I was giving all the reasons why people should be against this and not supporting him. People are reacting purely emotionally and it's fear based, and that fear continues to be stoked. And so people aren't capable of rational thought, even if we could agree on what the facts are. It wouldn't change anything because the emotional reaction is so strong. The way the brain works when you're in that fight or flight mode, that overrides your capacity to think through things and, okay, how do I want to handle this, or what's the best option? No, we're just like immediate, we must act now, we're in danger. And so factual discussions aren't going to change anyone's mind. And for some people, love won't either. Their wounds are too deep. All the things that happened that led them to be as hate filled as they are now, that's not going to be wiped away just because I smiled at them or asked them if they wanted a hug or something. But at the same time, it's also about what it does to me inside. If I allow that hate to grow and to vent it, it's not healthy for me either. It does as much harm to me. And like I said, I try. I often fail, but I try to be the light, as they say. And like Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high, kind of thing. Just do whatever small things I can. After I saw that family in the park, as I was walking back to my car, I bent down and picked up a fair amount of trash, which I would not have done otherwise with my bare hands, because I have issues with germs. But they were so inspirational. And also, I used to live in Hawaii, and so I know plastic trash, how it kills wildlife. And but yeah, so that was a very small thing. I picked up some pieces of plastic and put them in the trash as I left. But just little things like that, I think, and there's scientific data to back it up, that when we help others, it does improve our own mental health too and our life satisfaction. Same thing with gratitude and experiences of joy. I have a gratitude journal. And I remember years ago when everybody was talking about, oh, this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. Once I started doing it, I realized just how powerful it is, because then I'm on the lookout
Hang
for,
on just a
what
minute.
was it? Okay. So yeah, gratitude helps a lot. And the joy, that's the other reason the Bruce Springsteen concerts are so powerful, is because it's just pure exuberant energy, life-giving celebration
Yeah.
nonstop. And speaking of that, I get to relive my Phoenix experience because I was thrilled to discover that I am featured in another person's YouTube video, someone I don't know, have never met. In fact, I tried to contact him to say, hey, like, can I buy this video from you?
Yeah.
But no response. But anyway, replay that video often and can see myself singing and dancing and just loving life. And also Bruce's song Land of Hope and Dreams. I sing and dance to that song at least once every day now. And
I
it's become bittersweet because he sang it at Kamala's rally.
yeah.
But nevertheless, the overall message is just so hopeful. Tomorrow there'll be sunshine and all this darkness past. If you're weary, lay your head upon my chest. It's just a beautiful song.
So I was going to ask you if you had to top of the head 3 songs that you would Bruce's that if you had to be on your rotation for joy.
Land of Hope and Dreams,
Okay.
probably.
Those are good. I was sitting here thinking that definitely Land of Hope and Dreams, probably Better Days.
Yes. Yes,
So,
those are also excellent choices.
all right. I took a picture of the scan. I've now subscribed. If someone wants to reach you and they want to get your newsletter, what's the best way, Wendy?
WendiGordon.substack.com. And again, it's Wendy with an I and not instead of a Y at the end. So WendiGordon.substack.com.
I'm going to include the cue card on the show notes.
All right,
So,
awesome.
yeah.
And I do one-to-one coaching as well. If anyone out there is feeling overwhelmed spiritually, obviously I'm not a licensed mental health provider. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just a peer who's been there and wants to be supportive in any way that I can.
Any final thoughts, Wendy, before I get you out of here?
I hope Bruce adds some US dates.
Amen. That is definitely on my gratitude and prayer list for that. Wendy, this was so wonderful. Let's keep checking in with each other. Maybe later this year we'll have a follow-up session.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, I always
Thanks.
love talking all things Bruce and talking to you. We have so much in common in terms of our views on life and our appreciation
Yes.
of Bruce. And
Yes. And I got to get down to Houston so we can break bread together.
that would be fabulous too.
That sounds good. All right, listeners, go to the cue card. I'm going to have it on there. You can go Wendi Gordon with the I on Substack, sign up, let Wendy know what you're doing to keep your positivity. For now, everyone be safe, be kind, and we'll talk soon. Goodbye.